It's the morning of Thursday, 26th of January. Efforts to do a podcast last night went completely out of the window. 6 years ago, when we crossed the empty quarter from Salalah to Doha, we had two enormous sandstorms that all we could do was roll up in our blankets and lie on the sand. We didn't have tents at all. And eventually they blew through after 12, 16 hours. But, just all you would have seen had you driven past on that morning was just body-shaped mounds in the sand. And so we were completely covered in, sat up to shake the sand off our sleeping bags, etc. And last night was nowhere near as bad as that, but it was pretty unpleasant. For the first time we had sand flying and everything literally flying. A couple of the local Bedouin community came over and invited us into their tents and warned us of the wolves should we stay here, but stay here we did. And getting on towards midnight, the wind started to abate, but by then we were all rolled up in sleeping bags and trying to see out the night. But it's a much more pleasant morning now. The sun is rising, it's picking up some beautiful colour on some clouds in the sky. First sparrows are calling. We're in a lovely little spot, a couple of low dunes with some acacia scrub and overlooked by some lovely mountains, again with much evidence of prehistory and lots of old burial mounds and tombs looking down upon us from on high. So we're on the brink of the community of Taif. We will be reaching Taif later on today, but it's worth talking before we get into Taif of yesterday, because yesterday was a fantastic walk that Reem and I had in the morning, crossing albeit a small area of harat, but harat is the Arabic word for lava field. So remember, we spoke in the podcast about the East African Rift Valley extending up through Arabia, and so we're very much in volcanic country yesterday. And harat is really, really difficult ground, very difficult to take a vehicle on, almost impossible. You have to stick on what Bedouin tracks exist, otherwise you're going to have a puncture, B, you're not going to be able to go anywhere. And as Reem and I walked yesterday, the ground became more and more beautiful, but more and more challenging. Great fissures of cracks in the rock, which either of us could have easily fallen down really had we lost our footing, some of them 20 foot deep. It was like stepping across a crevassed field, going across Greenland many years ago, which I've done. The new moon is with us now. The Hilal moon has been up first thing pretty early in the evening and getting higher and higher in the sky. And we can use that to help us navigate. The guru of natural navigation is undoubtedly Tristan Gooley. If you've never looked at Tristan's work, I would urge you to Google the Natural Navigator. I went on a course with Tristan many years ago at his home in West Sussex, and then brought Tristan out to Oman to train some of my Omani instructors, because that sky at night is a navigational tool. Not so much in the UK, where you can rarely ever see the stars, but here in Arabia, where 98% of the sky is clear every night, then it's a great way to help you get from A to B, to get from here to Mecca if you're doing the long traverse of Arabia to do the Hajj, for example. But Tristan states in his book that if you join the two horns of the crescent moon in a straight line and follow that line down to the ground, that pretty much gives you due south. And we were putting that to the test last night, and it's pretty accurate. So the moon was up. That was lovely to see after 2 or 3 nights without the moon. What was also lovely to see yesterday, now back in Muscat, I have 2 dogs, rescue dogs. One is called Freya, after the explorer Freya Stark, and one is called Dora, and Dora was Philby's wife. So Philby named a bird after his wife, so my dog is named after his wife. He also named a bird, Dendrocopus dorea, the Arabian woodpecker, There aren't many trees in Arabia, so pretty unemployed woodpecker most of the time, I would think. But there's enough around to keep the odd woodpecker busy. But so Dendrocope Astoria, named after his wife. And I'm surrounded by birds in this acacia tree. And also there's a Philby's partridge, and Reem and I spotted a couple of partridge yesterday, because the harat is a place where people can't hunt very easily, so animals and birds take great security by being in the harat field. So it would have been lovely. We couldn't see them closely enough to know whether they were Philby's partridge, but for us they were Philby's partridge, and that's good enough. Definitely partridge. For Philby, yesterday he didn't go through the harat fields. Of course his guides would have known not to, because it would have been extremely difficult for camels. We found evidence of one dead camel in the middle of it all, but no signs of camels trying to go through. It's so difficult for their feet, and it's a real ankle breaking country. So Philby went around the Great Plain and of Raqba, and you may recall in yesterday's podcast he was speaking about how painful the day had been and how exhausted he was because his camel had been limping. It had got a bit of flint in its hoof, but he swapped camels very sensibly. His guides could see the discomfort that he was in, and he wrote in his book, "The day had witnessed a further shuffling of our camels. I began the march on the beast I had ridden the previous day, but my discomfort had become so apparent to all that a change was unanimously voted as necessary, especially as no lagging could be tolerated in the altered circumstances. One of my companions surrendered his mount for my benefit, and for the first time I experienced the delight of riding a perfect camel. In Himra, as she was called from her coat of sandy dun, there was no blemish. She alone, long trained almost from infancy, answered to her name, the mere whisper of which was enough to make her arch back her neck to receive food from one's hand. All things came alike to her, a wisp of hay, a lump of dates, a slice of bread, and even a hunk of cold camel meat. Her paces were perfect and buoyant, walking or trotting, and for me the day was one of perfect enjoyment, marred only by the thought that I had robbed poor Tammy of the beast he loved with a passionate love. Henceforth to the end of the journey I rode her and her alone, proudly conscious that I bestrode as good an animal as any in Arabia." So Philby obviously ended that day on a high, and now he's very, very close to his target of the hill community of Taif. And it was Christmas Eve, very special time for him, Christmas Eve 1917, and the final quotation I'll read for today was that it was Christmas Eve and we camped far out on the plain at a height of 3,900 feet above sea level. So he was slightly ahead of us here. We eventually ran out of daylight and found a campsite that we felt was relatively sheltered from the wind. It wasn't great though. We're at about 3,500 feet here. But he was well within sight of his goal, ringed around by the black camps of the Bedou. The air was cold and crisp. The full moon shed its grateful light on the peaceful countryside where the shepherds watched their flocks. Irresistibly, my thoughts carried me back over 1,900 years and more to just such a scene as this, when simple herding folk received the first tidings of an event destined to change the history of the world.